At 58, I inherited nothing but my mother-in-law's worn cookbook while my husband's sister got the house, cars, and $400,000. Everyone pitied me. But when I opened the cookbook at 11:30 p.m. and saw the handwritten numbers under every recipe, I realized this wasn't just a recipe book. It was a treasure map. But let me back up, because you need to understand how I ended up sitting alone in my tiny apartment at nearly midnight, crying over a grease-stained cookbook while my sister-in-law probably celebrated her windfall in the beach house she'd just inherited. The day had started with all of us gathered in the law office of Morrison and Associates. My husband David sat beside me, his hand occasionally squeezing mine as we waited. His sister Patricia had arrived 15 minutes late, wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a Louis Vuitton bag I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She'd barely acknowledged us before taking her seat across the mahogany table. Margaret Anderson had been a formidable woman. My mother-in-law had built a successful catering business from nothing, raised 2 children alone after her husband died young, and retired at 70 with what everyone assumed was a comfortable nest egg. She'd lived simply in her later years, in a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, driving the same Honda she'd owned for 15 years. The attorney, Mr. Morrison, cleared his throat and began reading. The will was straightforward at first. Margaret's house, valued at $320,000, went to Patricia. Her 2 cars, though one was that old Honda, also to Patricia. Then came the investment accounts, stocks, bonds, and savings totaling $380,000. All to Patricia. I felt David tense beside me as the list continued. Family jewelry to Patricia. Furniture and household goods to Patricia. The beach condo in Florida that I didn't even know Margaret owned to Patricia. And then, almost as an afterthought, Mr. Morrison looked at me. To my daughter-in-law, Claire Foster, I leave my personal recipe collection. The cookbook that has been in my family for 3 generations, hoping she will treasure it as I have. The silence in that room was deafening. Patricia didn't even try to hide her smirk. David's hand dropped from mine. Mr. Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of how lopsided this inheritance was. "Is that it?" David finally asked, his voice tight. "My mother left Claire a cookbook." "I'm afraid so," Mr. Morrison confirmed, sliding a worn, leather-bound book across the table toward me. Mrs. Anderson was very specific in her instructions. The book looked ancient. Its brown leather cover was cracked and faded, stained with decades of cooking mishaps. The pages were yellowed, and I could see handwritten notes peeking out from various sections. Patricia stood up, barely containing her satisfaction. "Well, I suppose Mother knew who really deserved her legacy. I was always there for her, after all." Her eyes flicked to me with thinly veiled contempt. Some people only marry into families for what they can get. The accusation stung, especially since it was so far from the truth. I'd spent countless hours with Margaret, visiting her twice a week, helping her with shopping and doctor's appointments, listening to her stories. Patricia lived 3 hours away and visited maybe once every 2 months, always with excuses about how busy she was. David said nothing in my defense. He simply stood, his face unreadable, and waited for me to gather the cookbook. As we left the office, I heard Patricia on her phone, already calling a realtor about listing Margaret's house. The drive home was silent. When we finally pulled into our driveway, David turned to me. "Did my mother ever say anything to you about why she'd do this?" "No," I whispered, still clutching the cookbook. "She never mentioned the will at all." "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, getting out of the car. "You spent more time with her than Patricia ever did." But there was something in his tone, a hint of resentment that cut deeper than Patricia's open hostility. As if he blamed me somehow for not inheriting something valuable enough to share. That night, David went to bed early, claiming a headache. I sat at our kitchen table, the cookbook in front of me, feeling utterly humiliated and confused. Had I misread my relationship with Margaret so completely? Had all those hours, all those conversations, meant nothing? At 11:30 p.m., unable to sleep and seeking some kind of understanding, I finally opened the cookbook. The first recipe was for Margaret's famous apple pie, the one she taught me to make during my first year married to David. Seeing her handwriting brought fresh tears to my eyes. But then I noticed something odd. Below the recipe instructions, written in much smaller text, was a series of numbers, 47.6205, -122.3493, followed by box 847. I flipped to the next recipe. Beef stew. Again, below the ingredients, more numbers, 47.6097, -122.3331, Unit 23. My hands started trembling as I turned page after page. Every single recipe, from appetizers to desserts, had similar notations. Coordinates. They had to be coordinates. And box numbers or unit numbers. I grabbed my laptop and typed the first set of numbers into Google Maps. The location that appeared made my breath catch. It was an address in downtown Seattle, about 40 minutes from where we lived. A storage facility called CQ-Space. The second set of coordinates led to another storage facility, this one in Bellevue. I spent the next hour checking every single notation in the cookbook. 23 different locations. All storage facilities. All with box or unit numbers. What had Margaret hidden? And why had she made me work to find it? At 1:15 a.m., I was still sitting there, my mind racing. David would think I was crazy if I told him. Patricia would probably laugh and say I was desperately grasping at straws, trying to find hidden value where there was none. But Margaret had been methodical, careful. This wasn't random. She'd wanted me to find these locations, to follow this trail. The question was why. I made a decision then. I wouldn't tell anyone, not yet. Tomorrow was Saturday. I'd visit the first location and see what, if anything, was there. If it turned out to be nothing, no one would ever need to know about my middle-of-the-night treasure hunt. But if there was something there, something Margaret had wanted me to find, then I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. I barely slept that night. By 7 a.m., I was up, showered, and dressed. David was still sleeping, so I left a note saying I was going shopping and headed out to the first address on my list. CQ-Space Storage was a large, modern facility with rows of orange doors and security keypads. I parked and sat in my car, suddenly unsure. What was I even looking for? How would I access a storage unit if it was locked? But as I approached the main office, I noticed my hands were shaking with something other than nerves. It was excitement, anticipation. For the first time since that horrible reading of the will, I felt something other than grief and humiliation. The office manager, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" "I think my mother-in-law may have rented a unit here," I said, pulling out the cookbook and showing her the notation. Box 847. Her name was Margaret Anderson. She passed away recently. The woman's expression softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Let me check our system." Her fingers flew over the keyboard. "Yes, we have a Margaret Anderson with Unit 847. The rental was prepaid for 10 years. She looked up at me. "Do you have documentation showing you're authorized to access it?" My heart sank. I hadn't thought about that. "I have her cookbook. She left it to me in her will. That's where I found this address." The woman studied me for a moment, then made a decision. "The unit is listed as accessible by Margaret Anderson or Claire Foster. You're Claire." I nodded, shocked that my name was already there. Margaret had planned this, had known exactly what she was doing. "I'll need to see your ID," the woman said, "and then I can give you a key." 5 minutes later, I was walking down a fluorescent-lit hallway, key in hand, toward Unit 847. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stopped in front of the orange door, took a deep breath, and slid the key into the lock. The unit was about 10 feet by 10 feet, and it was filled with bankers' boxes, neatly stacked and labeled. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and read the labels: Claire, Part 1, Claire, Part 2, and so on. There were 12 boxes total. I opened the first one with trembling hands. Inside were documents, neatly organized in folders. The first folder made my knees weak. It was a property deed. For a house in Portland, Oregon. In my name. I grabbed another folder. Stock certificates. In my name. Another folder. Bank account statements showing an account with $73,000. In my name. Box after box revealed the same pattern. Margaret had been systematically, secretly, transferring assets to me for years. Properties, investments, savings accounts, all hidden away, all legally mine, none of it part of her estate because technically, she didn't own any of it anymore. She'd already given it to me. I sank onto the cold concrete floor, surrounded by boxes, and finally understood. Margaret hadn't forgotten me or undervalued our relationship. She'd protected me. She'd known exactly what Patricia was like, had probably suspected how David might react to an uneven inheritance. So she'd found a way to give me everything that mattered without it becoming a family battleground. The cookbook wasn't just a recipe collection. It was a key, a map to everything she'd hidden for me to find. And by leaving me only the cookbook publicly, she'd made sure no one would contest or question my inheritance. There was nothing to contest. The will was clear. I spent the next 3 hours going through every box, documenting everything I found. By my rough calculation, Margaret had transferred assets worth approximately $1.8 million to me over the past 5 years. Properties, investments, cash accounts, even some jewelry she'd placed in safety deposit boxes using the same coordinate system. As I locked the storage unit and headed back to my car, my phone rang. "David. Where are you?" he asked, irritation clear in his voice. "Your note said shopping. It's been hours." "I'm on my way home," I said calmly. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Look, Claire, I know you're upset about the will, but we need to move past this. It's done." "It's definitely done," I agreed. "I'll be home in 30 minutes. When I walked through the door, David was in the living room with Patricia. Of course she was there. I should have expected it. "Claire," Patricia said with mock sympathy, "David told me how hurt you are about Mother's will. I want you to know I don't blame you for being upset. It must be hard to realize you weren't as important to her as you thought." I set the cookbook down on the coffee table and took a deep breath. Margaret left me exactly what she intended to leave me. This cookbook is the most valuable thing she owned. Patricia actually laughed. "That old thing? Claire, I know you're trying to save face, but it's okay to admit you're disappointed." "I'm not disappointed at all," I said, looking at David. "Your mother was brilliant." The cookbook contains coordinates to 23 storage facilities and safety deposit boxes. In them, she'd hidden assets she'd transferred to me over the past 5 years. Properties, investments, cash accounts. All legally mine, all outside the estate, all protected from probate or contest. The room went completely silent. David's face had gone pale. Patricia's mouth hung open. "You're lying," Patricia finally said. "You're making this up." I pulled out my phone and showed them photos of the documents. The house in Portland is worth $400,000. The stock portfolio is worth about $600,000. The cash accounts total roughly $300,000. There are 3 more properties I haven't even visited yet. Your mother left you the house and cars, Patricia, because she knew you'd expect them. But she gave me everything else years ago, in a way that no one could challenge or take away. David reached for the cookbook, flipping through it with shaking hands. "All this time? She was doing this all this time and never said anything." "She protected me," I said softly. "She knew exactly what would happen if this came out in the will. She knew how you'd react, how Patricia would treat me. So she made sure I'd inherit what I deserved without anyone being able to contest it or make me feel guilty about it." Patricia stood up, her face red. "This is fraud. I'll sue. I'll contest everything." "You can try," I said calmly. "But Margaret transferred those assets years ago, legally, with proper documentation. They weren't part of her estate. They were already mine. You inherited exactly what she owned at the time of her death." "David," Patricia turned to her brother, Are you going to let her do this? Are you going to let her steal our mother's money? But David was staring at me with a mix of shock and something else. Respect. Maybe. Or perhaps just the realization that he'd underestimated both his mother and his wife. It's not stealing if it was already hers, he said quietly. Mom planned this. She wanted Claire to have it. Patricia stormed out, slamming the door behind her. David and I sat in silence for a long moment. Why didn't she tell us? He finally asked. Why the secrecy? Because she knew this was the only way to protect it, I answered. The only way to make sure I actually got what she wanted me to have. If it had been in the will, Patricia would have fought it. You might have pressured me to share it. This way, it's clean, clear, and uncontestable. He nodded slowly, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm sorry. For how I acted yesterday. For not defending you to Patricia. For doubting my mother's judgment. Your mother was the smartest woman I've ever known, I said, picking up the cookbook and holding it close. And this cookbook is worth more than any house or car or bank account. Because it showed me that she saw me, understood me, and trusted me. That's the real inheritance. Over the next few weeks, I visited all 23 locations. The full extent of Margaret's planning became clear. She'd created a comprehensive financial legacy for me, complete with detailed instructions in sealed letters about how to manage each asset, which financial advisors to trust, even suggestions for how to invest for the future. David and I attended counseling. Our relationship had been damaged by his initial reaction, but we were working through it. Patricia, unsurprisingly, stopped speaking to us entirely, though I heard through family friends that she'd tried to contest the transfers and failed. But the most meaningful discovery came in the final storage unit. Box 23 contained one last letter, sealed in Margaret's handwriting with instructions to open last. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, you've found everything. I'm so proud of you. I want you to understand why I did things this way. When my husband died, his family tried to take everything from me. They said I wasn't deserving, that I'd only married him for money, that their blood relatives should inherit his business. I fought them for 2 years and won, but it nearly destroyed me. I didn't want that for you. I saw how Patricia looked at you, how she measured your worth by what you might cost the family. I knew that if I left you a traditional inheritance, she'd make your life miserable. David would be caught in the middle, and you'd probably end up giving things away just to keep the peace, because that's who you are, generous and kind. So I found another way. I transferred my assets to you slowly, carefully, legally. I learned the cookbook code from my own grandmother, who used it to hide assets from her abusive husband. Each recipe represents something I'm giving you, a piece of my life's work that I want you to have. The money isn't the important part, though it will give you security and independence. The important part is knowing that you were worthy of this. That you earned it through your kindness, your patience, and your genuine love for an old woman who sometimes pretended to need more help than she did just to have company. You made my last years joyful, Claire. You never came out of obligation. You came because you cared. That's worth more than any inheritance I could leave. Use these assets well. Live your life on your own terms. And maybe, someday, pass this cookbook on to someone who will understand its true value. With all my love, Margaret. I sat in that storage unit and cried, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of understanding, of feeling truly seen and valued by someone I'd loved deeply. The cookbook sits on my kitchen counter now, stained and worn and absolutely priceless. Sometimes I use it to actually cook Margaret's recipes, and sometimes I just flip through it, remembering her wisdom in hiding the most valuable things in plain sight. Patricia got the house, the cars, and the obvious inheritance. But I got something far more precious, Margaret's trust, her legacy, and a cookbook that taught me the most important recipe of all: how to protect what matters, how to be strategic in love, and how to recognize that sometimes the most valuable gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. And every time I make Margaret's apple pie, I remember the woman who was clever enough to turn a family cookbook into a treasure map, and generous enough to leave that map for the daughter-in-law who took the time to listen to an old woman's stories.